evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Emily McEwen, and I'm the Director of Advancement here at the Newport Art Museum. I'm delighted that you are all here this evening to join us for this meaningful collaboration with Newport Middle Passage and Jeff Weston, founder of Rogue Island Tours and a local historian. I'd just like to mention that events like this are made free and open to the public because of the generosity of our donors, many of who are here this evening, so thank you. I'd also like to introduce a very special individual, Victoria Johnson, who is a lifelong Newporter, close friend of the Newport Art Museum, and who has become a very close friend of mine. Without her, we would not have this collaboration, nor would we have the Black History installation that you see when you come through the corridor. If you haven't had the opportunity to check it out, I ask you to do so when you leave, and you will even see a picture of Mrs. J being crowned homecoming queen just a few years ago. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Johnson. Thank you.
I have to say welcome, and I am so happy that you are here tonight. You're going to learn a lot of history. But before I introduce Jeff, I have to tell you about this wonderful exhibit that they have here. And my favorite picture is the one behind me. And when I first walked in here and I saw all these people just looking everywhere, I had to find out, what are they looking at? What's happening in this picture? They are signing, or with the people who are signing the Constitution of the United States. But what thrilled me the most is that no matter where I sat, somebody was looking at me. And I want you to do that now. Find the person that's looking at you. And if you walk around, you'll find somebody else looking at you. No matter where you are. I'm probably the only one that even thought that while I was looking at it. But I had to bring it to your attention. It's wonderful. So now, Jeff's only been here about 8 years, but I know him already. Knew him a few years back. We're on the same board together. The Rhode Island of Battle of Rhode Island committee together. And I have heard him speak before. And when he finished, I was like, oh my God. Because he doesn't just speak and lecture. He talks to you. And when you leave here, you're going to leave here with some important information on African American history in the city. And that to me was what really brought him to my mind. And so I'm going to introduce you to him, Jeff Weston. I'm not going to tell you about him. I know you read about it already and all of the outlasts that went out. But this guy, you're going to want to hear him speak again and again. So when you hear that he's somewhere speaking, or if you want to go in one of his stores, please do so. Check out the sign. Thank you.
So there's a couple of omissions there in the opening. I'm an amateur historian, so if fact check me, I'll do it. If I ask a question I don't know the answer, I'll get it to you. And I'm also a Rhode Island prodigal son. I spent my first 10 years of my life in Bristol, and then had a career in Southern Connecticut, raised my kids there. My parents moved out to Bristol in early 80s. And I moved back here 8 years ago to take care of them, get them through COVID and all that kind of stuff. So they were here, I think, well over 50 years, but I know you locals they're still carpetbaggers. It didn't really matter. There's no such thing. I knew that would happen. Okay, so as part of that introduction in Bristol, this is really kind of poignant. When I was a kid in the 70s playing with matchboxes up in my attic, I'd be playing with matchboxes, and right on the wall there literally would be prayers written by the slaves. And that circular thing where the chains went in, there was a couple of those. And we didn't know any better. It was just, oh, wow, it's part of history. It's all that's happening up here. And we're going to talk about Bristol and the dirty little secret of slave trade in Newport, but especially Bristol and Mr. DeWolf. And we'll go deep on that in a minute. But it's also important, as Mrs. Johnson and I are colleagues, she's been wonderful for me. I love picking her brain about just anything with civil rights and things like that, because she's a living legend, and there aren't too many of them left, unfortunately. But we do serve on the board of Rhode Island, Battle of Rhode Island Association, which is really critical. I'm not going to go into it tonight, but it was the first black regiment in the American Revolution. Was all black, and they, it was a big risk. Everyone was very afraid to give African Americans arms, and they performed amazingly. They pushed back Hessian soldiers that were very well trained. They were mercenaries. They pushed them back twice and was able to help the evacuation of Rhode Island that led to them being able to fight in Yorktown. There's also the 14th Regiment in the Civil War as well that was all black. And again, under a lot of pressure to do well, they did, and they had many, many successful campaigns all the way to Texas. So, I'm going to start by talking about Rhode Island's founding, which you guys all know. Then I'm going to switch over to the Middle Passage, the abolition movement. If we have time, I'll do strong-willed Rhode Island women, starting with my late mother, and then have a conclusion. So, I do call it Rogue Island very affectionately, but there is it's not necessarily tongue-in-cheek. Because if you really think about the founding of Rhode Island, if you remember from your elementary school history, the Pilgrims were being persecuted in Europe for their religious beliefs. They came here, and the first thing they did was persecute others for their religious beliefs. And so there's a gentleman by the name of Roger Williams, and you're all familiar with him, but he did two things that kind of really pissed him off up in Plymouth. His first mistake was he said, and he was a theologist, but he said, why do we feel these miters and these books and this kneeling and all these calisthenics? Can't we feel God with our own conscience and have a real relationship with God one-on-one? Well, they didn't like that because they put half of them out of a job. But then this is what he did. It really got him mad. He said, we should be paying these Indians for this land. Oh, that was not going to happen. So he got wind that he was going to be thrown back on a boat to London. In the middle of a blizzard, came to Rhode Island, and settled in 1637, and said, you know what? We're going to try a whole new concept of the colony here. We're going to have laws of man and laws of church. They're going to be separate. And it was the very beginning of separation of church and state, 150 years before Thomas Jefferson. Emperors in China, kings and queens in Europe, all told their people that they had divine rights coming through them, and that's why they had the right to lead. So that was very, very revolutionary. But because of that, we'll get to the road part, anyone can come here and worship. I mean, we had the first Baptist church. We had the first synagogue. All these denominations came here. Atheists could come here. So we really developed a real non-traditional libertarian spirit that lives on to this day. And if you take my tours, we'll go much more deeper into that. I'm going to try to stick to the script for this one. So even the governor of Massachusetts called us the cesspool of New England, because it just had all these people that just like, don't tread on me, way before don't tread on me. So that was the founding. But switching over to what happened next. So Newport itself, that deep harbor, that was scraped with glaciers years and years and years ago. And it's a very unique harbor and strategic for military purposes and certainly for the industry of maritime trade. Any other city early in the 1700s or so, whether it was Philadelphia, New York, Boston, if you had one of those big wooden boats, you'd pull it up kind of close, but row everything back and forth. We had this deep harbor where we have Long Wharf, another very creative Rhode Island name, Long Wharf, because it's a very long wharf. Our beach is our first beach, second beach, and third beach. So it's just amazing that that harbor was so critical to building this maritime industry here. But there is a dirty little secret of what was built here, and really how Newport was built. Over 60% of Rhode Island boats were responsible for carrying Africans into North America. This dinky little state is responsible for 60% of it. In fact, if we were looking at downtown Newport, you'd see anywhere from 20 to 30 rum distilleries early on. And that rum distilleries was really critical for this trade, this new trade that came about. You take the rum to Africa, you trade rum for Africans, take the Africans to the West Indies, trade it for molasses, the main ingredient of rum. In fact, it was so disgusting, there was actually a formula, a very cold calculating, disgusting formula, that 220 gallons of rum equaled one healthy African male. So that's how scripted it was and how bad it really was. And it was a brutal ride over there too. 1 out of 5 didn't survive at all, and was just thrown overboard. So you just think about that. At the end of the Civil War, we had 4 million Africans in the South, I believe. So how many more would that have been if exponentially they weren't getting thrown overboard? But Newport didn't make as much money as Bristol, my hometown. Simeon Potter, up in Bristol, built the perfect formula for how to get about breaking laws and doing all, which ports to avoid, how to get real rules of slavery. And he taught his nephew, James, the trade. James had over 88 voyages to Africa, which is, when you think about that, that's an awful lot. He actually was responsible as a captain for an African woman who had malaria. He lashed her to the mast and eventually threw her overboard. And believe it or not, he was going to be tried for murder. And so he took off to the Caribbean and hung out. And in typical Rhode Island fashion, he found a way to bribe the right judge, and all of a sudden the charges were dropped. Bristol was an amazing place because it was totally vertically integrated as a business. He ran not just the trade of the slave trips, but he also, all the banking, all the insurance, and of course the rum making. So the whole town was kind of complacent. They didn't really want to stop this trade. And it did go even further than after it was officially announced, I think in 1808, that slavery was abolished. Again, Mr. Wolfe was so clever, he started just flying a Spanish flag just to get around it. He was getting cracked down on by the Newport customs agent. And so, lo and behold, he went to Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time, and said, hey, we really need a customs house here in Bristol. We don't need to deal with Newport. And he hired his brother-in-law to run that. So he really had it all going that way, and it finally petered out when we got closer to this Civil War. But it's just an amazing Rhode Island story. And of course, in the true Rhode Island story, he went on to become a U.S. Senator, which shouldn't be a surprise. So slavery in Rhode Island, 10% of our population in Rhode Island is black, which is higher than any other state in the north. Of course, the south, they outnumbered everybody because of slaves and plantations. And slavery, of course, I'm going to say is terrible, it's bad. I'm not advocating slavery in any way, shape, or form, but at least it was a little bit different up here. You actually lived in the same house with your master. You were free to walk around the town. I'm sure you were still abused. It wasn't perfect, but it was a little bit better than 100% chattel in the South, where I know, I don't know the life expectancy in the South. I do know early on the sugar plantations in the West Indies, the average life expectancy of a slave coming over was like 7 years. So it did get better later, but it was just brutal. You did learn the trade of your master, and you were able to earn your freedom and earn your living to get your freedom. So for that part, like I said, it's still evil. There's nothing good about it, but at least it was a little bit more progressive and helped with the abolitionist movement, which we're going to talk about, because people like Samuel Hopkins saw this firsthand and said, well, this is really bad, you know, and the Quakers were here and they said, this is really bad. So because of that, it really kind of helped with the abolitionist movement moving on. Not so much on the mainland. You go over to the other side of the bridges, which I rarely do. I think you need a passport to go over there. They really were true. I didn't learn this until very recently. They really were true plantations. You know, we had the name Rhode Island and plantations. I just thought that was like, oh, we had big fancy farms. There were several true plantations with slaves, and their whole trade was making something called kersey cloth, which is brown coarse cotton fabric for the slaves' clothes down south. So it would be cheaper to clothe them with this crappy Kersey Claw. And because of that relationship, as you are all well aware, up until the Civil War, many plantation owners would come here in the summer from South Carolina and the South to avoid malaria. They became very integrated in the city, and that led to a lot of tension with the abolitionist movement that was starting to get up here. But Charleston was very much considered a sister city. But the abolition movement did start very early, and I acted with Ezra Stiles, and then the misguided Samuel Hopkins. I'll talk about why he's misguided in a minute. But they were really preaching anti-slavery well before we even became a state. So when they were here before the American Revolution, they realized how bad it was. Hopkins helped to seed the Free African Union Society in 1781, which is a real beacon for the black community here. All of a sudden, you had a community looking out for you. They founded their own school. Schools were still segregated. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And it was for blacks only, too. But Hopkins and some of these guys had a really misguided idea, and we'll talk about it again, it reoccurs later, that, wait, we took these poor people from their homeland. Why don't we found a new country for them in their homeland and send them back and let them start all over again? Which was tragic in the sense that slavery had already been here for like 200 years, so they really were Americans. They were just as American as anybody else, as being born here for 3 generations or whatever it was in. And on top of that, the few that did go back, they weren't ready for the malaria, the diseases, and those things because they'd been immune to it so long, and it didn't get off the ground. So then the torch was passed to George C. Downing, who was a very successful, free black man from New York who moved up here, and a very successful businessman. He was known for his oysters. He was an oyster farmer and then chef, and then proceeded to really pick up a lot of business here in Newport. He built the Seagirt Hotel on Bellevue, which is, I'm pretty sure it's where the Stop and Shop is now. And that was like the first big place, black owned, that was kind of critical. As he got more and more outspoken and more involved in the abolition trade, somehow that hotel burned down, and they're pretty sure it was arson, of course. With locals, there were other locals that Mrs. Jig made me do all kinds of research on this stuff. I'm not used to it, but she's making me really work. There were other locals named Isaac Rice and the Redmond family who were very instrumental, but it was still Downing who was the leader and a very national voice for abolition. And he really deserves more than he gets. To distract a little bit, it's almost like Ida Lewis to me. Ida Lewis was just an amazing person. There should be a documentary on her at least, but we might get to that, we might not. So he did befriend and partner with Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass actually spoke here at the Union Congressional Church on Division Street. He was also banned from speaking here once because it was just so arbitrary and going back and forth with the abolitionist movement. But they both were arm in arm, going around the country, going to conventions, getting grassroots movements for black people, and then were instrumental in getting the 14th and 15th Amendments passed, giving the right to votes to blacks. They actually had a big fight with President Johnson, who's a racist. Johnson, he's another one of these people that had the same misguided thing, like, hey, why don't we just give you guys your chance to go back? We'll fund it, and you guys can just go, because, you're not equal to us. Thank God he didn't last, and Grant came in, and Grant was much more progressive, and a lot got done, but we won't go further into Reconstruction and all that, too. Douglass actually said right to the president's face, you know what, 250 years of residency pretty much makes us American, and as does the American Revolution. I'm sorry, the Constitution. So he really pushed back. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the abolitionist movement. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, a little more fun, to pirates versus privateers. And I see my friend from Trinity here. I'm going to take a couple jabs at Trinity, so don't get me in trouble. So believe it or not, everyone knew that England had this tremendous navy and was very powerful and sailed, the British flag never sets in the sun, it was just so huge because of what we had in India and everywhere. And, but it's little known that prior to that, in the 1700s early, they didn't have much of a navy. They're constantly at war with a Catholic country, whether it's France or, really? Is it not working? Okay, I just getting some notices in the back that they can't hear me. So the king came up with this concept of privateering. So a privateer is, you get this key and marking, and you could attack any ship anywhere out there as long as it was Dutch, French, Portuguese, or Spanish. And you get to keep 80% of the loot, which is really amazing because any other seafarers at that time were treated like dirt, and many were just impressed from bars in Ireland. And so it really became, especially for Newport, because we had such a good scaling skills, that it became a real important place to, or a field to go into. And everyone liked it until some of these guys are like, hey, wait a minute, there's a British boat over there. Why don't we just attack that? So the sooner you attack a British boat, you go from a privateer to a pirate. And of the 7 founders of Trinity Church, I think 3 of them are privateers. So the pious, God-fearing Anglicans. And piracy was really kind of cool. I've been doing a lot of research on it. It was very egalitarian. There were female pirates. There were African pirates. There were American Indian pirates. And the captain was like the least important guy, which is kind of interesting because it goes against every time of maritime rules. He was really just in charge of the attack, but everyone else voted on everything, right down to the cook. The cook would, everyone say, hey, that big ship over there, do you want to attack it or not? And everyone raised their hands, yes or no. And that's how it all happened with these fights. And they would have, again, very equal. It is true about the peg legs and the eyes because they were just fighting right first-hand combat with these huge cutlasses or swords. And so it was a very bloody business. And they actually had health care way before anybody else. They all, if a guy lost a leg or an eye or, God forbid, died, everyone else put in a share for either his family or him so he could continue to go on. So piracy was going really well until about the early 1700s, and finally Great Britain said enough's enough. And as you're probably all well aware, there were actually 23 pirates hung down by a Brenton hotel in 1726. And piracy was considered so heinous that their bodies were not buried. They were put out to bob in the sea and up and down with the tide. No, we're on time. All right. Okay, so that gives me a chance to go into strong-willed Rhode Island woman. Got one right here. Again, because of that libertarian spirit, women did have a lot more rights here, especially with the Quakers. The Quakers were very egalitarian as well. They would sit in that Quaker house from 1699 that you see next to the White Horse Tavern, which I don't think is a coincidence if they come there praying for 3 hours and going right to the White Horse. But anybody could say whatever they wanted. They didn't really have priests. You just say what you felt in your gut and about God. But you really were Quakers. I mean, they'd get in your face, quake, try to convert you to God. So that's how they got the name. One strong-headed woman named Mary Dyer, she went up to Boston, gets in somebody's face, starts quaking. And they said, Mary, she had pretty influential husband down here. She said, Mary, you come up here one more time, we're going to hang you. She goes back with 2 gentlemen and herself, start quaking. Sure enough, they put nooses around all 3 necks. They hang the 2 dudes, and they let her go. And they say, okay, Mary, we mean it this time. You come back here one more time, we're going to hang you. Sure enough, she went back one more time, and they hung her. And then I will get to Ida Lewis. Ida Lewis was just amazing to me. Her father was the lighthouse keeper, and it's still there. It's now the yacht club there. And it did look like that. I was kind of shocked. I thought it'd be a more traditional, cone of a lighthouse, but it was just a little box there. And the job of the lighthouse keeper was really to keep the drunk sailors from Port Adams and Army guys from falling in the ocean and drowning, and also any kind of swamp boats and things like that. So the owner, Mr. Lewis, has a stroke, and his daughter at age 14, takes over the duties, and she never left it for over 50 years. And this is more amazing than the fact that she was 5'3", 109 pounds, and she's taking in these big, first of all, she's rolling out to them, and then she's pulling in these bodies of these big soldiers. So it's really amazing. She was around towards the Gilded Age. We're going to talk about the Mean Girls next. A lot of the women from New York kind of looked down their nose at her because it really wasn't a really good job for a female at that time. And she replied, "Only a donkey would think it's unfeminine to save human lives." So I could go on and on, but I'm going to just wrap it up with the Mean Girls of the Gilded Age because they're just very colorful stories that happen there. And I know you guys are going to say they're not Rhode Islanders, they're New Yorkers. So, but either way, I slip them in on my speeches. First, there was Mammy Fish. Mammy Fish was crazy. She's my favorite. She had true blue blood going all the way back to the Mayflower, and she didn't like any of the new people and all these new tactics and these balls and these. I consider them like the cheerleader table in high school that no one could sit with. You know, they were just out. They were all frenemies. They were all out trying to do each other at the parties and things like that. Mammy had a lot of funny sayings. Once she had a really hard cold and was coughing a lot, and her husband said, "Honey, is there anything I can get for your throat?" She goes, "Yeah, how about that diamond necklace in the window at Tiffany's?" And he did. She actually had a party where she told everyone solemnly that an Italian prince was coming, Prince Diago, was going to be there at 3 o'clock promptly, so they're all lined up in their tuxedos. The door opens, and it turns out to be a monkey in silks who proceeds to get a little wasted on some champagne and climbs up and starts throwing light bulbs at everybody. But one of my funny things is, we're going to talk about Alva next. And Alva Vanderbilt, she was kind of very strong-willed, independent, actually did a lot of good. And we're going to talk about that. But basically, Alva once confronted Mammy at a party, all outraged at her. And if you remember the pictures of Alva, she has kind of a broad, round face. And Alva says to her, Mammy, I hear you told somebody I look like a frog." And she said, No, dear. I said you look like a toad. Alva had the gall to divorce her husband for cheating on her and take half the money. That was unheard of in those days. I wish it was just an amazing thing that she was able to pull that off and get half of that money. And then she proceeded to marry Belmont, who was 10 years her junior, her ex-husband's best friend. She moved in, kicked his horses out of the first floor stables that you probably all know about Belcourt, and then the Marble House was just used for laundry and linen storage. But she was really, really instrumental in the suffragette movement. She built that Chinese tea house because mistakenly they thought the Chinese woman got the right to vote, and it really got them all sparked up. She spent a lot of money and time getting the rights for women to vote. In fact, on her deathbed, she said, "I guess it's time to meet God. I hope she's ready for me." So I want to bring it back and end it with just an understanding of what we're talking about here, the more serious parts, not just the crazy Gilded Age women. Racism, the bravery of people like Douglas and Downing, who really did face lynching and KKK threats constantly. But they inspired Martin Luther King. I'm reading a book on Martin Luther King right now, and I was 5 years old when he was shot, but my mother, being a strong-willed woman, I didn't know what was going on, but she took away all my toy guns. She was just crying and took away all my toy guns, and I could never have a toy gun again. And I grew up in a house with 4 sisters and me, so I was very emasculated. But I've never experienced racism like you have and a lot of other African descendants here. I will say I've felt it firsthand, and it's a big difference. You know, I'm just Irish Catholic, big guy, 6 foot, no one's really, picking on me in a big way. But in the mid-'80s, when I first got out of college, I went on a financial management training program for a company called Combustion Engineering. So they took like 6 or 7 of us and put us around the country in different spots. And one of them was an African-American friend, and he was a little bit older than the rest of us. He'd worked in a plant in Chattanooga. And lo and behold, we get our assignment to go to that plant again. And they're calling him boy, and it was just us 4 white guys and him. And he was so gracious. He took us out every night to the nice restaurants and the bars and the discos and all that. 'Cause I was 22. And, and he would just sit there quietly while we're having all kinds of fun. And one night it's just me and him. And he goes, Jeff, I think it's time to go to one of my places. I'm like, all right. So we go to this place where it was just a fire escape. And you go up and there's a curtain. And you walk in and it was 100% black people, 100%. I sit down, he sits down, and he goes, excuse me, I'll be right back. He made me sit there for 25 minutes. Everyone staring at me, everyone glaring at me, everyone wondering, why are you here? He finally sat back down and he said, now you know what it feels like. So, I'm not saying to do. That's an easy thing compared to what other people have been through. But I had a black roommate too in Stanford, and I can remember in the 80s, just walking down the street and you hear every car door click, 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 locking because the black guy was coming by. And, I'd like to say we come a really long way. I know my kids are colorblind. They're 30 and 28. And I have a good friend of mine who married an African-American, he's white, and that was 25 years ago. When they went to restaurants, people were staring, and now it's gotten much better. But we all know it's not over, and we all really have to keep fighting for it. I wish it was generational and it was just dying out as people died out, but there's a lot of younger people that have these racist tendencies, and we just got to do our best to stop it. So I will say there's been a lot of progress in my lifetime at 60. You've seen more than anything in the world, but as you've alluded to, it's still out there. So that's really my message for the night. And any other questions? Oh, by the way, my tour company, I'm the perfect guy if you have want to get rid of your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law for a couple hours when we're visiting. I'll take them all. I do 100% customizable tours. Take people to the mansions. I take walking tours. I know where the key is at Trinity, so I'm always breaking into there. They let me. So anytime you want a different type of adventure on here, I call it entertaining, irreverent, but historically accurate. So, but thank you for your time. And I'll take questions. Uh-oh.
I just wanted to mention the Jazz Fest, which I think celebrated its 70th birthday this past July, was an important way for Blacks and Whites to celebrate, be safe together. People, if you read histories of people coming to the Jazz Fest here in Newport, that's often one of the leading remarks that's made. And I invite people to go visit Ida Lewis's gravesite in the Island Cemetery here. It has oars and an anchor on it. And right next to the common burying ground, which has several, it's an important slave cemetery. So, my 3 factoids.
Thank you. Anybody have a question? Yeah, I know a lot of you probably already knew all this, but hopefully you got something out of it. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Very educational.
Thank you. All right, well, with that, I'll let you get out to your dinner.
I can't let you go because what Jeff has told you is so extremely true. The prejudices are still here. The racism is still here. And those of you that are here tonight, you may have seen it and didn't even recognize it. But I see it here tonight. I see more white people, and in every single one of my lectures, I see more white people than I see people of color that come to our lectures. And I have friends that are here today. I have some members that are part of the Middle Passage. I'd like for you to stand. My Middle Passage people, stand. There you go. Yep, they're here tonight. And you will see that we are very diverse. And when Peter Fay and I created Middle Passage Portmark or Middle Passage, we decided that we will always be equal in numbers, because it was very important. But one thing that I know about the town that I was born and raised in, well, that came back 25 years later, as the first African-American female principal in a high school in the entire state of Rhode Island. And I didn't know it. I did not know it until somebody pointed it out to me. I did not know it. Now, how could that be? In 1967? How could that have been? But it was. But I have high school students who I loved. And they loved me, and I know it. If you come to my house, you'll see a rock this big, and on it, it says trust, because that was our motto. And my kids made that for me. And I know that those kids in the 7 years that they were there, I know that they intermingle. And it takes me back to the time when I was a freshman at Rogers High School, when Rogers High School was on Broadway. Us as black students would sit under the window of the principal. And one day he came out, and there must have been 10 of us. And he comes over to us, and we thought we were in trouble. And you know what he said to us? He said, I sit here every day in my office and listen to you talk. He says, what I want you to do, I want you to go mingle with the whites. And he kept saying, mingle with the whites. Get up right now. Mingle with the whites. And you know what? We did. And that was the best lesson that I could have learned. And when I come to my events like this, I can only say to my people, we need to stop segregating ourselves. We do. And it comes from the fact it's how we lived when we were younger, because of the separate neighborhoods. Our kids go to school, they don't see color. I know they don't. I've been down to Rogers High School even recently. These kids play sports together. They're in clubs together. They go out together. They go to dances together. They have a good time together. These kids don't know color. So you're right, Jeff. It is going to change. And it's going to be our children that make that change. And it's going to be you who help them make that change. Please mingle with the blacks. Let it happen.